The Wyoming plains in February had a way of erasing certainty. Wind moved like an animal with teeth, flinging sleet and snow across the landscape until the world was reduced to white and sound. A stagecoach from Laramie had wrestled the storm for hours, horses sweating, wheels groaning, the travelers inside pressed like shells against the noise. Evelyn Hartwell clutched the worn leather strap overhead and tried not to count the ways things could end badly. She was 24, trained at St. Agnes Hospital in Boston, and carried $12 and a stubbornness that had survived 3 years tending fevered tenement wards. The advertisement had been blunt. Nurse wanted at Hawthorn Ridge. Room and board. $30 a month. Must be Hardy. She had circled Hardy until the pen wore through the paper. A violent lurch threw her satchel from her lap. Through a frost-clotted window, she saw the driver's jaw working as he reined and cursed. The horses screamed. The coach tipped. Metal screamed against ice. The carriage rolled into a drift and gave up with a final, shuddering hush. Evelyn tasted iron on her tongue as she hit the bench, pain radiating along her shoulder. Silence framed the moment like a held breath. The wind screaming outside, the creak of wood, the brittle snap of a strap. She dug fingers into canvas and found the satchel. Leather scraped her palm. Pushing at the stuck door, she felt cold rush in and nearly lost feeling in her toes. The driver was gone, maybe to seek help, maybe to walk back to the ranch. The horses had run, swallowed by the white. No, she told the sky, more to prove something to herself than to anyone else. I did not spend nights with typhoid patients in Boston to die of cold 2 miles from my job. She wrapped her shawl, shouldered the satchel, and fought the storm. Hawthorn Ridge rose out of the blizzard like a promise. 2 stories of honey-stained timber, windows amber with warmth. Evelyn's boots sank with a muffled sigh as she climbed the porch and pounded until a shape filled the doorway. A woman in her 50s, hair pinned in a severe knot and face carved by years of work, peered down like a gatekeeper. "You the nurse?" the woman asked. "Evelyn Hartwell," the young woman answered. "From Boston, hired by letter." The housekeeper, Marta Keene, as she would quickly learn, stepped aside with little ceremony. "Get in then, before you track Wyoming through my floors." Inside, a great stone hearth swallowed cold and spit back heat. Ranch hands at a poker table forgot their hands to stare at the dripping stranger. Evelyn shivered and offered the letter between gloved fingers. Marta read the neat script, nodded once, and gestured toward the stairs. "Up with you. Mr. Hawthorne's been hollering since before supper. Be warned, he's not a welcoming sort." He was waiting in a bedroom that smelled of liniment and old grief. Caleb Hawthorne lay propped among dark furniture, his left leg elevated and wrapped in reeking bandages. Even lying down, he seemed carved from the land, broad-shouldered, hair threaded with silver, a face that learned to hold anger like armor. "You lost?" he barked when she opened the door. "Evelyn Hartwell, nurse. You hired me." Her voice trembled only where it had to. She set her bag on the bedside table and began unpacking, scissors, sterile cloths, carbolic solution. Practical things. Things you could trust in a house where trust had been known to fail. Caleb laughed, a sound that had no warmth. "I hired a frontier hand, not a Boston miss." "I trained at St. Agnes's," Evelyn said. "I've had 12-hour shifts for $1 a day. I do not quit." He studied her for a long moment. The firelight threw angles under his cheekbones. "My last nurse left 'cause she couldn't stand the solitude." He tightened the blanket around his shin. "Won't have another quitter." She sat, met his gaze. "I'm here to treat you, Mr. Hawthorne, not to entertain you. Your leg needs cleaning." That admission made him snarl, but not fiercely enough to hide the concern that tugged at his voice. "You're getting yourself sopped through. Marta, bring dry things." Marta returned with a plain cotton dress, former nurse's clothing, with an expression that was not wholly unkind. Evelyn changed in a spare room by a small stove. In the mirror, she saw a patient, purposeful woman, hair damp against her skin, dark crescents under her eyes. She thought, not for the first time, about what a life of service could ask of a person. Then she thought about how badly she wanted to keep her promise. Caleb attempted whiskey despite her protests. The bottle smelled like attempt and habit. Evelyn replaced his filthy bandages, and the smell of infection hit her, flesh angry and swollen. She worked with steady hands. Caleb gripped the bedpost, making wood sing soft protest. He never cried out, but his breathing stuttered like someone holding back a storm. "Talk," she said, gentle as an order. "Tell me about the ranch." "Hawthorn Ridge has been in my family since '66, Caleb said in halting measures. "My father built that house, worked land his whole life. Wife, Amelia. She left me 2 years ago, dead in a supper. Doc said poisoning, but no proof." Rage hung behind the words. Grief made them raw. Evelyn listened. The room grew colder around the edges, as if the house itself held its breath. Marta's guarded look downstairs made more sense. Houses that held sudden deaths gathered suspicion like lint. "I am not the kind who poisons," Evelyn promised. "I am here to mend, but you'll have to let me do the work." Caleb's hand curled under the blanket. "You're a stubborn woman." "And you're a broken one," she said. He could not hide how that landed. The corner of his mouth twitched, almost humor, almost a smile. "We'll see how this season goes." They settled into a wary alliance. Marta taught Evelyn the household's rhythms. The ranch hands, 6 men worn by weather and time, watched the city girl with curiosity and, eventually, grudging respect. Evelyn could fry flapjacks with one hand, stitch a laceration in another, and keep records straight. She learned to break silence with a smile and to answer suspicion with competence. Caleb tested her. He watched the way she poured medicine, sniffed her food, hit a crutch, demanded she swap bowls. Some mornings he was brittle and furious. Other days he was simply a man who refused to be helpless. Evelyn had seen that kind before, pride that preferred suffering to the humiliation of asking for help. She'd watched a father in Boston, once a huge man who had broken his back, bloom again because he'd let other hands steady him. She told Caleb that story in the quiet that comes with dressings and dawn. For a long while, suspicion won more days than not. He watched her pour laudanum into a spoon and asked her to taste first. She did. She drank the bitter tincture without grimace. He hid things only to return them later, sheepish and apologetic. The test slowed. Spring crept over the prairie like relief. Mulch and muck replaced the white glare. Caleb's leg knit under Evelyn's care. Weeks of coaxing and careful motion returned strength. He sat up with ledgers and shouted orders to men who rode out while he still limped. He was a manager from bed to field, a wire of energy wrapped with pain. Evelyn learned his schedules, his jokes, the way he chewed the inside of his cheek when making hard decisions. He learned to accept her presence in the room as a fact rather than a threat. She, for her part, found herself laughing at his jokes, feeling the odd tug of warmth when he watched her with an intensity that had moved beyond professional scrutiny. Marta noticed, eyes crinkling with approval. "You've got him, girl," she said one afternoon. Evelyn shut the door gently to hide a blush. The first larger temptation came from manners and opulence. Gideon Vale, the owner of the general store in Clearwater. He arrived one muddy morning in a polished buggy and a suit that refused to accept prairie dust. He greeted Caleb with a practiced candor and eyed Evelyn like a merchant appraising goods. "Miss Hartwell," Gideon said, offering a ribbon wrapped in handsome paper. A small token. The frontier could use color. Evelyn accepted it simply, then hid it away in her pocket when she saw Caleb's jaw harden. Gideon returned with flowers, tins of tea, a ribbon of silk. His smile never reached his eyes. Caleb watched him like a hawk and warned Evelyn to be careful. Was Gideon attracted? Perhaps. Was he also someone who calculated advantage? Caleb's suspicion extended beyond romance to property. He had seen people value land more than people in marriage as currency rather than covenant. When Gideon's presence became a pattern, cash gifts sliding across porches and notes like invitations, Caleb lost patience. He told Gideon in plain terms what his house would allow. The merchant's polite, oily smile froze. He stowed his gifts but returned once, then twice, and finally left. Evelyn set the ribbon aside, an innocuous thing that became a symbol of choices she had not sought. Caleb's intrusion into a private reception of gifts felt intrusive to him and oddly protective to her. It was one of the earliest turning points where gratitude and exasperation braided into something tender. Hawthorn Ridge grew green, and the house grew crowded with small domestic triumphs. Caleb began to do more than tolerate Evelyn. He teased her when she burned toast. He learned to shave every morning. The men at work began to bet on when he would finally propose to the nurse who had weathered his storms. Silas O'Rourke, the foreman, and the others made wagers on dates and methods. They loved him in a new way because something had returned to him, a lightness that had been absent since Amelia's death. For Evelyn, attachment came the way work does, quiet, through routine and shared effort. She braided a bandage and his hand brushed hers. She carried bread up the stairs, and he looked at her as if she had stopped a particular kind of loneliness. She tried to stay practical, reminding herself that she had a vocation and that nurses kept careful boundaries. It was not enough. Between procedures and ledger sheets, small kindnesses became milestones. He brought her tea without being asked. He walked without a crutch down the stairs once and glanced at her like someone seeing land after a long ship ride. Once, in a barn smelling of hay and cleaned horses, he said the two words she had not expected. "I love you." She was in the doorway, sunlight haloing her hair. The horse nosed Caleb's palm, as if forgiving some old injury. She should have been shocked. Instead, a rush of laughter and tears and relief welled up inside her. "Say it again," she told him, breathless. He reached into his pocket and took out a brooch with filigree and a small sapphire, Amelia's brooch, found after dusting cedar chests and unraveling small, careful domestic histories. "She would have wanted you to have it," he said. "Marry me, not for ceremony, but because I can't imagine a morning without you." Evelyn kissed him instead of answering, then said yes with a merriment that made the rafters feel brighter. The barn roared with the cheers of men who had watched the slow repair of a soul. They married in a simple service in early May. Marta scrubbed the parlor until it shone. A circuit preacher came from Clearwater for a modest fee. The men drank and danced until midnight. Laughter filled the house that had once held only ghostly silences. Guests spun Evelyn around the kitchen to a fiddle tune until she was giddy and sticky with flour and joy. Caleb watched like a man who seemed newly appointed to happiness. Life after marriage was work brightened by companionship. Evelyn took over the books with a diligence that made the ranch nearly solvent overnight, organizing ledgers, catching supplier overcharges, turning a chaotic pile of bills into understandable rows. She converted a dusty storeroom into a small infirmary with glass cabinets and a sign in the window. Open Wednesdays and Saturdays. Word spread of the nurse who delivered babies, treated wounds, and kept careful, tender records. People came from Clearwater and farther, bearing produce and gratitude when coin was not available. They had 3 children in time: Willow June, with her dark hair and her father's gray eyes; Tobias Flint, born during a thunderstorm that rattled windows and frayed everyone's nerves; and Lena Ono, a happy, stubborn child who preferred to climb the fence rather than sit politely. The house learned to live with noise, the small, elated chaos of a family that chipped away at loneliness. Caleb's grief never disappeared. It became threaded through laughter in a way that made both more honest. He spoke sometimes of Amelia, how she hated the isolation here, and of the strange suspicion that had once clouded the house. He told Evelyn about it because he trusted her. He told her because together they could carry it and, over time, leave it on the kitchen table where it could be examined and then set aside. They weathered practical hardships with humor. A supplier twice overcharged. Evelyn corrected the ledgers and turned a loss into a profit. The clinic kept them afloat through winter storms when travel meant staying put and everyone needed stitches or a midwife. The children learned to help around the house, to fetch water, to watch calves, to accept that sometimes life was mud and sometimes it was bread. One drought year worried them. Rain came late. When at last the sky opened in a November downpour, the children danced. Marta cried with grateful tears, and neighbors sang in the wet. Caleb held Evelyn in the barn doorway, both soaked through, and they laughed because they had built something that could be washed and still stand. "We did it," he said, voice thick. She rested her forehead on his and answered, "Together." Years slid on like a good coat. Hawthorn Ridge prospered. Herds expanded. A new barn rose. The clinic added visiting hours. Travelers praised the laughter that poured from the windows and the steady kindness of 2 people who had once been broken. Evelyn became known beyond the ridge. Neighbors called her the woman who stitches more than flesh. Caleb became a man who could trust without relinquishing caution, a farmer who had learned to let warmth back into his voice. In the small moments, the stolen touch while reading by lamplight, the way he teased her over coffee he could never quite make right, the way she scolded a boy for climbing during a herd roundup, nothing dramatic happened. It was a life like a lived thing, steady, slightly crooked, full of work and mercy. There were scars, money worries came and went. Town gossip sometimes churned like a small storm. Once, a rumor about the long-ago death crept back into conversation when an old neighbor remembered something, an overlooked alibi, a missing boy who'd left town years before. They investigated politely, proved what needed proving, and found mercy in the small truth that some things had been tragic accidents and some had been loneliness wearing a particular mask. Hawthorn Ridge kept the truth on the mantle like a lesson. When the children were older and ran toward the far pasture under summer sun, Caleb and Evelyn sat on the porch and let their hands meet. "Do you ever regret coming?" he would ask. "Never," she would say. "I traded a life of crowded wards for a house with ranch hands who swear like sailors and a husband who refuses to brew decent coffee. Best trade I ever made." "Mine too," he answered, smiling. "You healed this valley." She shook her head. "We healed each other, and the valley, but mostly each other. If this tale found you warmed in winter, or lit your mind like a hearth, do something small that means a great deal. Share it with a friend, drop a line to tell me which scene held you, or save it for a slow afternoon. Your small acts are how stories travel, by hands and mouths and quiet recommendations. Would you like a sequel, years later, when the children are grown and bring their own weather with them? Tell me which character you want to follow next. Willow finding her own road, Tobias learning to mend more than fences, or Marta's quiet backstory revealed. Your choice shapes what comes next. Hawthorn Ridge remained, as it should, a place of stubborn hope. The prairie rolled on, indifferent and generous, the sky vast as the promises two people kept. Show up, do the work, and love with the steady practice of daily bread. And if ever you find yourself standing in a wind that wants to take everything, remember the nurse who walked through a blizzard because a promise was worth more than fear, and the man who learned to trust hands that would not harm him. That, in the end, felt like everything worth telling.